Okay, our next lecture deals with the second institution of government, and that's the presidency. And in the United States, we do elect our president, but the election of our president isn't necessarily as straightforward as it is when we elect senators or when we elect members of the House of Representatives. And so, one of the first things that we're going to talk about in this lecture is how we elect the president in the United States. And so the election of the U.S. president, it is outlined in Article 2 of our Constitution. It is an indirect election of the president, and it is known as the Electoral College. And so the founders put into place this indirect election of the president for a number of reasons, to protect smaller states from larger states, to um, help with ensuring the veracity of elections, and in some cases because they didn't necessarily trust the people. And so we're going to look at how the U.S. president is elected. Then we'll look at a couple of videos that will help to explain it a little bit more. It is a complicated process that I really hope to explain well for you, so that you can understand it. But if you have any questions following this lecture, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. And so with the Electoral College, there are what are called electors. And there are 538 electors, okay? Each state in the United States is afforded the same number of electors as members of the House and Senate. So in Texas, we have, I believe, 36 members of the House of Representatives. Every state has 2 senators, so we have 2 senators. So we have 38 electors. Okay, so you take the number of senators, you take the number of House members, you add those together, and that is how many electors the particular state has. And remember, House members, the number changes every 10 years after the census with reapportionment. So if our population grows, we get more House members, we also get more electoral votes. California is the big winner with 55, and Alaska, oddly enough, has 3 because it is so small in population. Every state is guaranteed at least 3 electors because every state has 2 senators and every state has at least 1 member of the House of Representatives, as is the case with Alaska. With the passage of the 23rd Amendment, the District of Washington, D.C., they have 3 electors themselves. And so even though there are 535 members in the House of Representatives and the Senate, total 100 in the Senate, 435 in the House, we have 538 electors because D.C. is afforded 3. Now, in order for a person to win the presidency, out of these 538 electors, they must receive 270. They must receive a majority. 270 electors are needed to win the presidency. And so what happens is candidates will create a strategy for which states to spend resources on. And so this is where the idea of red states versus blue states sort of comes into play. You've probably heard that before. Red is the color that is associated with Republicans. Blue is the color that is associated with Democrats. And so if you have a red state, it is a Republican state. If you have a blue state, it is a Democratic state. And then there are states that are called purple, which means it's a mix of the two. And so red states, if you're in a red states, Democratic presidential nominees are not going to pay much attention to Texas, to these red states. And a lot of these red states occur in the deep South, and Texas is a red state. Conversely, Republicans don't pay much attention to blue states, places like California and the New England states, except for New Hampshire. Sometimes they will flip back and forth. But they will create some kind of a strategy, a number of states that they can cobble together this 270. Now, each political party has a slate of electors, okay? And the political parties in each state chooses their electors sometime before the general election. So there's a different set of electors for each candidate. So if a presidential candidate wins the popular vote in the state, their electors are elected. Okay? And there are 538 electors. Texas has 38. So in Texas, in the last, I can't even tell you how many presidential races, the Republicans have won Texas, then the Republican 38 electors are elected. And so what happens is in 48 states, I'm sorry, there's that. In 48 states, it's a winner-take-all situation. So if the Republicans win Texas, they get all 38 of Texas's 38 electors. So that is 38 electors towards that 270 that is needed to win the presidency. Okay? Maine and Nebraska are proportional, meaning they split theirs they split their electors depending on what percentage the Republican gets versus what percentage the Democrats get. So I think Nebraska, I don't remember, guys. I don't remember how many Maine and Nebraska have, but say Maine has 4 electoral votes. 1 can go to, say, the Republican, and 3 could go to the Democrat. It just depends on how the vote takes place. But by and large, in 48 states, it's a winner-take-all situation. Now, these electors are going to be the individuals that officially elect the president in a meeting. Okay? There is no constitutional provision or federal law that requires electors to vote according to the results of the popular vote in their states. Some states, however, require electors to cast their votes according to the popular vote. These pledges fall into 2 categories: electors bound by state law and those bound by pledges to political party. And so the meeting of electors takes place on the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December after the presidential election. Presidential elections are held in November, and so the first Monday after the second Wednesday in December following that election, these electors will meet, these 538 electors will meet, and they will cast their votes for the president. And so if there are 290 electors that have been elected because Republicans won, then 290 of these electors will vote for the Republican candidate. And so essentially it solidifies the election for that Republican candidate. After the election takes place, the electors meet in their respective states. They cast their votes for the president and the vice president on separate ballots. And then on January 6th, in a joint session of Congress, each state's electoral votes are counted in a joint session, and members of the House and the Senate meet in the House chamber to conduct the official tally of electoral votes. So the electors meet in their state, they cast their votes for the person who won, typically winner-take-all situation, and then they send that tally to Congress. And on January 6th, Congress will have an official tally, an official vote. And the vice president, which is the president of the Senate constitutionally, will preside over the count and announce the results of the vote. And so the president of the Senate, the vice president, will then declare which person, if any, has been elected president and vice president of the United States. And so it's this sort of complicated process. We go vote at the state level. Whoever wins in our state, the popular vote, will then get all of those electoral votes, and they have to cobble together a certain number of states to win that 270 that is necessary. Now, what happens if there is no clear winner? If there is no clear winner, then the vote will go to the House of Representatives, who will choose the vote will go to the House of Representatives, who will choose the president, and the vice presidential decision will go to the Senate. And it may sound kind of odd that there not be a clear winner, but it has happened. In the election of 1824, we had 4 different individuals running for election. We had John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William H. Crawford. When the vote came out, there was no clear winner. Adams had 84 votes, 84 electoral votes, and remember there aren't going to be as many electoral votes back then as there are now. But Adams had 84 votes, Jackson had 99, Crawford had 41, and Clay had 37. So it goes to the House of Representatives. And the top 3 vote getters are eligible in this case. Since Clay was the 4th place finisher, so he got to decide which of the candidates he would support. He was also, interestingly enough, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And that is the House of Representatives is the chamber that would decide the election. So what happens is John Quincy Adams is going to have a 3-hour meeting with Henry Clay prior to the election in the House of Representatives. Now, both say that they did not discuss Clay's place in the presidential cabinet in this meeting, but following this meeting, Clay is going to throw his support behind Adams. Adams will win the vote in the House on the first round of voting, largely thanks to Speaker Clay's support. And then after it's all said and done, Clay is going to be offered the position of Secretary of State in Adams's administration. Well, Jackson, who, even though it wasn't a clear majority, had won more of the electoral votes in the original election, he was enraged, and he called this the corrupt bargain. And he would go on for the next 4 years and rail against this corrupt bargain and rail against John Quincy Adams. And in 1828, he would rerun as president against John Quincy Adams, and he would soundly defeat John Quincy Adams in the 1828 election. You can also win the presidential election without winning the popular vote. And this has happened 5 times in our nation's history. It happened in 1824, which we just spoke about. It happened in 1876 with Rutherford B. Hayes running against Samuel J. Tilden. Hayes will win the election by 1 electoral vote, but he will lose the popular vote by 250,000 votes. In 1888, Benjamin Harrison is running against Grover Cleveland. Harrison wins 233 of the electoral votes to Cleveland's 168, but lost the popular vote by 90,000. In 2000, the famed George W. Bush versus Al Gore, Bush will win 271 electoral votes to Gore's 266, but will lose the popular vote by 540,000 votes. That's over 500,000. And then in 2016, Donald J. Trump versus Hillary Rodham Clinton, Trump's electoral number was 304 to Clinton's 227, but he lost the popular vote by 2.9 million votes. And so we have to look at why we have this electoral college. Why is it possible to win the election when more people in the United States actually vote against you? And there are a couple of different videos that I would like to, or there's one video particular that I would like to watch that sort of explains the Electoral College a little bit more. And so we're going to take a little bit of time. We're going to look at this.
Hey everybody, I'm Lara Trump. President Trump's birthday is...
Well, enjoy the little ad here, but it is a 5-minute video that talks about the importance of the Electoral College and why we have it, because there is a huge debate out there as to whether or not we should abolish it, get rid of it. Has it, out? Is I mean, should it have expired? Is it outlived its usefulness? So we're going to look at this real quick, and then we will move forward.
I want to talk to you about the Electoral College and why it matters. All right, I know this doesn't sound like the most sensational topic of the day, but stay with me because I promise you it's one of the most important. To explain why requires a very brief civics review. The President and Vice President of the United States are not chosen by a nationwide popular vote of the American people. Rather, they are chosen by 538 electors. This process is spelled out in the United States Constitution. Why didn't the founders just make it easy and let the presidential candidate with the most votes claim victory? Why did they create, and why do we continue to need this electoral college? The answer is critical to understanding not only the electoral college, but also America. The founders had no intention of creating a pure majority rule democracy. They knew from careful study of history what most have forgotten today or never learned. Pure democracies do not work. They implode. Democracy has been colorfully described as two wolves and a lamb voting on what's for dinner. In a pure democracy, bare majorities can easily tyrannize the rest of the country. The founders wanted to avoid this at all costs. This is why we have three branches of government: executive, legislative, and judicial. It's why each state has 2 senators, no matter what its population, but also different numbers of representatives based entirely on population. It's why it takes a supermajority in Congress and 3/4 of the states to change the Constitution. And it's why we have the Electoral College. Here's how the Electoral College works. The presidential election happens in 2 phases. The first phase is purely democratic. We hold 51 popular elections every presidential election year, 1 in each state and 1 in D.C. On Election Day in 2012, you may have thought you were voting for Barack Obama or Mitt Romney, but you were really voting for a slate of presidential electors. In Rhode Island, for example, if you voted for Barack Obama, you voted for the state's 4 Democratic electors. If you voted for Mitt Romney, you were really voting for the state's 4 Republican electors. Part 2 of the election is held in December, and it is this December election among the state's 538 electors, not the November election, which officially determines the identity of the next president. At least 270 votes are needed to win. Why is this so important? Because the system encourages coalition building and national campaigning. In order to win, a candidate must have the support of many different types of voters from various parts of the country. Winning only the South or the Midwest is not good enough. You cannot win 270 electoral votes if only one part of the country is supporting you. But if winning were only about getting the most votes, a candidate might concentrate all of his efforts in the biggest cities or the biggest states. Why would that candidate care about what people in West Virginia or Iowa or Montana think? But you might ask, isn't the election really only about the so-called swing states? Actually, no. If nothing else, safe and swing states are constantly changing. California voted safely Republican as recently as 1988. Texas used to vote Democrat. Neither New Hampshire nor Virginia used to be swing states. Most people think that George W. Bush won the 2000 election because of Florida. Well, sort of, but he really won the election because he managed to flip one state which the Democrats thought was safe, West Virginia. Its 4 electoral votes turned out to be decisive. No political party can ignore any state for too long without suffering the consequences. Every state, and therefore every voter in every state, is important. The Electoral College also makes it harder to steal elections. Votes must be stolen in the right state in order to change the outcome of the Electoral College. With so many swing states, this is hard to predict and hard to do. But without the Electoral College, any vote stolen in any precinct in the country could affect the national outcome, even if that vote was easily stolen in the bluest California precinct or the reddest Texas one. The Electoral College is an ingenious method of selecting a president for a great, diverse republic such as our own. It protects against the tyranny of the majority, encourages coalition building, and discourages voter fraud. Our founders were proud of it. We can be too. I'm Tara Ross for Prager University.
Join Prager.
All right, so that should kind of help perhaps give you a better idea of what the Electoral College is. I hope it does. We're going to look at one more thing in this lecture before I end it, and we move on to the next portion. The requirements to be the president. There are constitutional requirements to be president, just like there are to be senator and a member of the House of Representatives. You must be at least 35 years old, and the youngest president to be elected was John F. Kennedy. The youngest person to ascend to the presidency was Theodore Roosevelt. He took over as the president when he was about 42, I think, and I think Kennedy was a little older than that. You must be a natural born citizen of the United States, which was a question that came up when um, Ted Cruz was running for the nomination, because he was actually born in Canada. And so there was a big debate as to what it really means to be a natural born citizen. His mother was from America. So does that mean he was from America? Anyway, a big question that wasn't really ever, um, no no conclusion was ever drawn in regards to that, and I dare say it's just a can that's been kicked down the road that we'll have to grapple with at a later date. And you must have lived within the United States for 14 consecutive years prior to running. So even though you're a citizen, you can't have lived outside the United States in the 14 years prior to running. All right, so we're going to stop here with this lecture. When we come back, we're going to talk about the powers of the presidency, the express powers, delegated powers, inherent powers, and then we're going to, that'll sort of take us into some of the individuals that assist the president in running the government, and then we're going to be off to the races to look at the judicial branch of government in our next lecture series. So I'll see you then. Thanks.